Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining me once again. Today, I would like to actually wrap up on Genesis chapter 2, but with specific emphasis on the creation, not of man, but of the woman, and why there was so, and what was the purpose, and why did God do that. Now, the book of Genesis, if you're not aware, let me just refresh your memory that God could have done all these things in a split second. And he doesn't have to have so many verses and so many chapters to describe his creative abilities and his creative acts. The reason why we have such a lengthy and poetic narrative is to actually teach us how to live. This is God's way of communicating to us how God did everything, what each of these things mean to him and to us, and how we ought to live before him so that we understand the purpose of why he did some of these things, and that we are not doing it out of our own imagination and our own intents. And so we're now in Genesis chapter 2, as is highlighted, and we ended last week on the creation of man, which is in verse 7. Now today we will continue with verse 8. We ended here last week, and the Lord God formed man out of the dust of the ground. And so we talked about God forming man out of the dust of the Adamah and breathed into his nostrils the neshama of life. And man became a living being. And this was our highlight from last week. Man became a living being from two things. One, he was made out of the dust of the ground. And then two, he had the breath of God, and thereby the image and the likeness of God made him into a living nephesh. Now today we're going to cover verse 8 onwards. Now interestingly, in verse 8 onwards, you find that the Lord God had planted a garden eastward in Eden, and there he put man whom he had formed. And out of the ground the Lord made every tree grow that is pleasant to the sight and good for food. The tree of life was also in the midst of the garden, and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. These verses don't have much of a problem in the translation, but for our purposes this evening, I would like to point out one little word to you. The word is garden, garden. And here we have the Hebrew word garden. It's gen Eden, and the reason I'm showing you this is because it's quite interesting. So it is Gan Eden. And so based on this, in a contraction, we have garden. So our English word garden comes from the Hebrew word Gan Eden. And that would give you a very good picture that the original intent of a garden is a beautiful place. It's a place of pleasure, right? Or delight. And that was where God put man in. And we commonly call this paradise, but actually it is an enclosure. A garden, or a gan in Hebrew, is actually an enclosure of an area planted with trees, and it's fenced up. And hence, that is how the idea of a garden comes about. And it's a pleasant place. It's sheer delight. And God placed man not in the open world, but in a very, what I would call protected, a very well-designed place so that man can enjoy the existence in the fellowship with God. And hence, we have this word garden that comes from the word Gan Eden. And that would be something that you could take some interest in, okay? Now, moving forward, We are now looking at verse 9 and verse 10. And so this is how we would see verse 9. So God caused the ground to sprout all the trees that is for food. And they are all so nice. So the first thing that you realize is that God placed man in that garden of pleasure and placed all the trees that is really desirous of food. And so God really made a beautiful place. And in the middle of that place, we will find the tree of good and evil. And I've translated it as the tree of life and the tree of awareness of what is agreeable and disagreeable to God. All right? So this is just a preference of how I would translate this. Now, once man was placed in the garden, we read in the New King James, and the Lord God took the man and put him in the garden to do two things, to tend and keep. I'm not sure whether you understand these words, but we'll take a look at it. And then he told man that out of every tree you may freely eat, but of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat. For in the day that you eat of it, you shall surely die. And so we'll take a look at this because it has an impact on how man ought to live. So you look at verse 15. And God took man, and the word really is very intimate. It's not just to take man as a concept, it is to take him along, take him in the hand, so to speak. And so you can see a picture of God leading man into the garden and showing man there. That's the idea of fellowship that God had with man. And in this case, man, the word used for man is Adam, right? Adam, right here. Now, I just want to pause here just to show you that these two words are something which we actually don't quite get. When God brought Adam into the Garden of Eden, he is there to do work. So you can see here, there are two things you have to do work or to serve in the garden. And then he is to guard, to preserve, protect, and keep watch of the garden. So the interesting thing about God bringing man into the garden is not to lie down and the fruits will drop into his mouth. He is supposed to do something in the garden, to take care of the garden, so to speak. And that's the word here, to care and to serve. But not only that, we have an interesting word is to keep. Now, we always thought to keep is actually do something, but in the Hebrew, to keep is really not to do something. To keep is actually to guard, to preserve, to protect, to keep watch, to make sure that the garden is in good hands, to make sure that it is not spoiled. And so the caring or the doing of the work to tend in the garden, to serve in the garden, has a purpose also is to preserve the garden as a paradise, as a place of pleasure. And hence, that was what man was supposed to do. Now we move forward to another verse. And as we move forward, I just want to point out to you from verse 16 and 17, without going into the details, I just want you to see that this was how we can actually understand verse 16. And then God gave the command. See, the command was not just to serve and protect. There was a specific command that was God's intention, that all of the fruit of the garden you can eat. And the word eat that we read means to begin to eat until you finish eating. And the idea here is to tell us that the action of eat is a process. Now, we can't capture that in the English, but I'm just sharing with you. The underlying Hebrew is to tell us that they can eat from every tree, and they can begin to eat and then finish eating as a process of eating. But in the next verse, this is what we are told. And then from the tree of good and evil, as I've translated as awareness of what is agreeable and what is not agreeable to eat, because the day that he finished eating, this is important for us to understand, eating is a process. You start and you finish. But the day you finish eating, you will begin to die until you finish dying. And that's the expression in the Hebrew. Now, we can't capture that very well in the English because we say, you will surely die. Now, of course, yes, the person who eats this will surely die. So the nuance here would be that it's a process to die, and then until he completely dies. And that's the process. Now, ultimately, I think what the Hebrew is trying to express here, that God has put it in such a way, is that there is a process of dying, and that in that process of dying is always an avenue for our repentance. Right? That's how we could see that, because it is not a drop-dead concept that you eat and you drop dead. This is about eating, to begin eating until finish eating. And so when you take off the fruit of the good knowledge of good and evil, the day you finish eating, you will begin to die and finish dying with a purpose given to man, that in hope that they will repent. So that is the idea of the process. Now, this is where we will focus our attention this evening. From the New King James, in verse 18, we read that it is not good that man should be alone. This is the first time ever in chapters 1 and 2. In the creative act of God, in the formation of the man, male and female, at this point in time, only the male gender. So there is a gender that the Bible tells us. And that the first one is the male gender. And God said, it is not good. Now, all over in chapter 1, you would see that God said, and it was good, and it was good, and it was good, and it was very good. Right? Chapter 1. Now, in chapter 2, remember, this is a focus of the time in the plains, as we had discussed last week. It is not a contradiction of chapter 1. It is a focus of life in the plains, in the flatlands, in the farm, and in this point in time in chapter 2, in the garden. A garden being the place of pleasure. And so God said, it is not good, and this is the first time that God had ever said that it was not good, and he was going to fix this. Why was it not good? Because it is not working out for man to be alone. So the intent that God had was to make man and somebody else. And here we have this word called a helper, comparable to him. And this is what we want to take a look at. A helper comparable to him. What does that mean? Now we have here in the second part of verse 18, and that's what I want to point your attention to. Why was it not good for man to be alone? Because man is not complete by himself. All right? And so let me share with you what the Hebrew actually says right here. So you find that the purpose of God coming to this verse in verse 18 says that he will do something about it. He will make, he will fashion, he will bring about for the man one who helps him, right? And it comes from this word, adzah, is to surround him, to help him, to protect him, and to support him. So this one that God is going to make for man is someone who will help the man, or support the man, or to protect the man. And the second part is, it was going to be his opposite. It is not going to be identical to the man. It is going to be parallel to the man. He is also going to be in front of the man so that it becomes his counterpart. In short, this person that God is going to provide for man is one who helps and becomes his complement. Complement. And so when we talk about the helper, it is not a servant. So we need to understand that. This is a person who is going to complement, who is going to fit in the opposite of what man is, particularly not just physically, but also psychologically, in the character-wise. And so it would be somebody who would complement the man. And here comes the role of the gender. Now, does the Bible talk about gender? Definitely it does. Adam, for example, is masculine in gender. And here we have not seen the feminine gender just yet. But the identification at this point in time was that as a male gender by himself, God says it is not good for him to be alone. And hence God will fashion, bring about, and make someone who is going to protect, help, or support him, being his opposite. Somebody who will complement him, his counterpart. I think that would be some of the better words to use. And now let me skip on to verse 20. Sorry, not 20, verse 21. And here we need to understand one thing. In verse 21, as we proceed, for man not to be alone, God did something. See, God can see that man being alone is not a good thing. And so man and God went to do something to make a helper, somebody who would support him, and somebody who would complement him to be his opposite, right? And then thereby, that would be good. That's the idea. So a man and a woman is good. And very much like the Chinese word, right? When you have the word good, how, and they've got a boy and a girl, right? And it's good. And so God caused a deep sleep to fall on Adam. And this is the first time you've got anesthesia, and this is general anesthesia. And he slept. And he took one of his ribs. And this is important because the making of this person to complement man is a part of man, not someone that God made separately from the ground all over again. And so God took the ribs, closed up the flesh, and then the rib which God had taken from man, he made. And this is the word for fashion, for fashioning, for designing, and making into a woman. And that is where we find the word woman. And he brought her to the man. And thereby, Adam said, this is now bone of my bones, flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman because she was taken out of man. Therefore, a man shall leave his father and his mother and be joined to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. And these are the verses we want to spend some time on right now. When God took the rib of man, so you need to understand right now is that God did not go to the ground to form the woman. God started with the rib of a man. Now, scientifically speaking, obviously, you will be using his DNA, his genes, right? And so man has an XY set of genes, and then the woman has an XX. Okay, so scientifically speaking, perhaps that's how we could look at that. But the woman is going to be of the man. And here the word that God used to make the woman is about a construction. It's a very interesting word because it is about to build a house. The woman is, the choice of word that God used is to build a house, used for the woman. And the woman is to take care of the house. And so this is the whole idea of the poetic way of expression. The woman was built, designed, constructed by God. It is not arbitrary, it is by design. And God used the rib that was taken from man, taken in the hand of God, right? Same word as God led the man to the garden to take him by the hand. God took the rib in the hand and formed her. That's how intimate the design and the construction and the making of the woman is. And after God made the woman, God caused her to come near to Adam. Now I want to introduce you to two very special words. And that is what we won't see in the English, but we can only see it in the Hebrew. First of all, the word is Isha. And it's written this way, right? This is Isha. And this is woman, translated as woman. And the other word is Adam. So we have Adam, that is made from the dam, which is blood. That's what we learned last week. And this is Isha. And that's all you need to know for now. The word for woman is Isha, and the word for man at this point in time is Adam. But I just want to point out to you that the word Adam doesn't really mean man. It also means mankind or humankind. Right? That would be a more generic word to use. So, but remember this word, Isha. That's the word used for the woman. And so God brought the woman to the man. And that is important. Now we are in verse 23, and I want to show you something that the English Bible never translated. And this is what happens. And the man said something. And he made a declaration, basically. When he saw the woman, right? He saw the woman. He said, this one is the beating of my heart. Now, this word is not translated in the English text. And I don't know why, so I can't give you a reason for it. But basically, when Adam saw Isha, Adam made a declaration that this one that he saw, the most beautiful woman on earth, is the beating of his heart. And this word here is like the idea of a gudabuk, you know, that kind of beating. He was getting excited. So that's how the word is described. Remember, the Hebrew words are all very action-oriented, so that the listeners who's hearing these words can actually vividly imagine what is happening. So now you can imagine with Adam. Adam saw this woman and immediately declared that this woman is like his heart beat. And that would be the first reaction of man. Now, I hope that you can see this, because man is very excited to see the woman. At the same time, the meaning is very intimate, that the man not only sees the woman as a complement, but as his very heartbeat. And that's how this verse is expressed. Now, the second part of it is this. For the longest time, when I was reading this, bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh, sounds very odd and it doesn't resonate with our culture. But when you look at the Hebrew, it is quite interesting, which is why we are looking at it today. So the first part was the man looked at the woman and declared that she is his heartbeat. The second thing that man declared was that she is not bone of my bones. Unfortunately, the English has translated it a bit wrongly, which I feel are wrongly. It should be translated as bone out of my bone, which is true, because God took the rib of Adam to make Isha, the woman. The second phrase is flesh of my flesh is also not correct, because the expression in the Hebrew is flesh out of my flesh. And so this is a very oriental way of expression. The woman is to the man three things, not two. One, his heartbeat. Two, his bone that was taken out of his bone. And three, flesh that is taken out of his flesh, which means that anything happens to her, it will affect him because they are of the same flesh. Anything out of the bone affects him because they are of the same bone. So they are both of the same kind and of the same beating of the heart. And that's how the Hebrew expresses this verse. And Adam explains. He says, why? Because this one is to be called Isha. The man gave the name to the woman. And by giving the name to the woman, he describes her as one who is mortal, that is opposed to a man, out of a man, that's what it means. Out of a man came the woman, and is taken from a man, right? These are the words that's being used. That she is called Isha because he is taken from Ish. And this is where I want to give you the expression. This is what we can see. The word woman is Isha. Oops. The word for man is Ish. And so in the Hebrew, what you can see is, this is what happens. This entire word is here. And the woman has an additional letter, He. And so the woman is taken out of the man. And it is in the play of words as well. So in the English, I think it also gives us the same thinking as well. This is man. And we have woman. And this is here. And so even in the English, there was an attempt to actually make that word correct. And so this is the understanding of man and woman, that the woman is taken out of a man, beating of his heart, bone out of his bone, flesh out of his flesh. So what is important that I could show you is that woman as a feminine gender is specifically designed for man as a complement to him. And the man looks at the woman not as a master, but as his own heart, as his own bone, as his own flesh, because she was taken out from him. And he recognizes the complementary nature of the genders. And so we have a masculine, man-ish, and a feminine, isha, both from the same root word, ish, whereas the woman has an additional part in the name. And so in this context, I think we should be able to appreciate both man and woman as two very distinct individuals, both in the image of God after his likeness. And so this is important for us to realize. The man and the woman, or the ish and the isha, are both made in the image and likeness of God. This is to help us appreciate the fact that both are precious in God's sight. Although man is first made, and that is just part of the process, and he was charged with the command, the woman was made to complement the man. And so both of them are complementary. So we have the masculine and the feminine, both as image and likeness of God. Now, what does that tell us? I want to share a little bit here so that you have an appreciation that the image and likeness of God are reflected in both the masculine and feminine gender. Now, too often we always think that a man is always like God and the woman is like who? Actually, both are like God. And so you could see that the characteristic of the woman and the characteristic of man comes from the likeness of God. And together, perhaps, if you join them together, they would be the complete likeness of God and the complete image of God, not individually. And so that was the whole purpose that God made man, both male and female. It is a very distinct creation, and God made both very distinctly, differently. And so last week we saw that God formed man out of the dust of the Adamah and made Adam and blew into his nostrils the neshama of life, and he became a living nefesh. Today we saw that from this living nefesh called Adam, God took the rib out of him and built, constructed, created the woman and brought the woman to the man. And the instant reaction of the man is that she is the beating of his heart, bone out of his bone, flesh out of his flesh, and recognizing that the two of them are together. That is the picture in the Hebrew. Now we have our famous verse that everybody says that it is the instruction of marriage. So let me come to this point and explain this in a bit of the Hebrew language. We call it marriage. There is no word called marriage in the Hebrew at this point in time. All that we are told is this: how God made the man, how God said that it was not good for man to be alone, how God decided to make someone to help him and complement him, how God described how he took the rib out and constructed the woman, so that you can see that there's a lot of intimate involvement of God in the making of the man and the woman, each differently, and brought them together, and they react to each other, primarily the man looking at the woman. So I hope that people who study this understand that the man needs to see the woman the way that Adam sees the woman. How God made man and woman to see each other in that sense. That is not in the English, unfortunately, but it's in the Hebrew. Now, when it came to verse 24, it is also an instruction to tell man what you're supposed to do now that you know there is each other. And so the common English word that we see is this. Therefore, a man shall leave his father and his mother, and the important word here is leave, and to hold fast to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. Now, what does this mean in the Hebrew? And this is what I'm trying to point out to you. Because the Hebrew says something which the English cannot express very well. First of all, let me help everyone understand this. The word for father is Av. These are very primary root words. The father literally means the pillar of the tent. He is the strength of the home. And the description of the mother, Im, and she is having a meaning of the strong water. She glues and holds the home together. And so in the tent, and remember, this is ancient Hebrew, they are part of the home. The tent is the home. And there is the father and there is the mother. The father is the role of a pillar, the strength of the home, provides for the home. The mother is the strong water, the glue of the home, the person who holds the things together. Now, in the home, you will always see two things. Right here. The man and the woman. The ish and the isha. When the man and the woman is not outside the home of the father and mother, they are always under the authority of the father and mother. So this whole picture will tell us how this works. The Bible always assumes that whenever you have an independent woman and an independent man in a description narrative, inevitably they are always married. If they are not married, they are seldom spoken of because they are always behind the father and mother in the tent. And so the description in this verse then says that the man and the woman, by default, the man also means the woman, they need to leave, and the word leave is yatsuf. Yatsaf from the word yatsaf. It is to let go, set free, leave behind. So that's the whole concept. And so some people will ask, so what is the right word? I would say in the Hebrew, all of them is correct. And so the man must leave behind the father and mother. He must set free from the father and mother. He must let loose from the father and mother. The idea is this, because the man is to leave, to come out, so that he is no longer under the tent or the authority of the father and mother. Why? So there is a purpose. Understand this model, the father and mother in a tent. So the man leaves, by implication, the woman also leaves. Okay, that's how the Hebrew will have this story. Now, if they leave, we have another word here. It is davak. Davak here means to cleave. And cleave means to cling, to stay with, to stick, to join together. Again, if anybody asks which is the right word, I would say all of them. Because Hebrew is an action-oriented concept. It is not a singular definition. And so you find that the man and the woman needs to join together as one. So remember, they have to leave. Both must leave. And then they join together as one. And so the man and the woman are complementary so that they can become the father and the mother of their homes. And then when they have children, it will be an Ish and an Isha. And they will be under the authority of the father and mother, which is that new couple. And so in the whole concept, or the Hebrew concept in this verse, the father and mother are both authorities of the tent. And in so doing, the man and the woman are the children, and they are under the responsibility and the authority of their father and mother. When they leave the home, that is when things change. They leave the home and they become the man plus the woman as one. They become the father and mother of their homes. So what is important is the leaving and cleaving, to let go of the mother and the father. Now this is a model anyways, and God gave us this model, spoke to the man and the woman that they have to do this, that as they come together, they become one, under the one roof, and they have to be separated from the authority of the father and mother, including all the influences, because influences are all authority. So the leaving is important. To let go, let loose, set free. And so I guess here the advice for the father and mother to their children who eventually marries is to set them free, let them go, let them loose, because they are no longer under your authority. Now they leave and they cleave to each other, and the newly married is supposed to remember that they are now the mother and the father of their own homes. They rule with their authority of their homes of the newborn Ish and Isha. And when they in turn leave, they will cleave to each other as well then. And so this whole idea is a cycle. And the cycle is about the tent, the home. And the whole intent of a marriage is between a father and a mother. And the Av and the M, there is a masculine and there is a feminine. And there is a masculine and there's a feminine. And hence, gender is very much in this story of the creation of man and woman. Also, the formation of the home. And that is what the verse is all about. To leave and to cleave. To set free and to join together. To stay with each other as one under one roof. This is the whole concept of the creation of man and woman, the origin of gender, male and female, the role of the father and mother in a home or under a tent, and the man and woman to leave and cleave that authority to form their own father and mother authority, so that their home will have their own children, the man and the woman, and one day they too will leave and cleave. And so the idea of setting them free, letting them go, is so important. Now that's the model that God has given to us today. Is there gender roles? I believe so. At least from the word, we can see, right? And the words itself tells us that there is gender. And why does gender play a part? Because of its complementary nature, of how God wanted man not to be alone, but to be combined. To be combined. And so that reflects the Chinese word how. And it gives us this whole picture. It's good that there's a father and mother. It's good that there is a man and woman. But more importantly are the verbs, the actions of leave and cleave. And hence, this is how I think we would understand this. In the Hebrew, it says, on the ground, therefore, the man shall set free, leave behind his father and mother, and to stay with his woman, and exist as one whole body, united, one body. See, the one is a unit. The unit is the body. The body is the part where it is combined, but it is one body. Now, in this case, you find that the man and woman, for this model to work, it is to adhere to the rules that God has put in place. Now, obviously, many people would not follow this rule. Does that mean that it does not constitute the marriage? Well, if you look at it, it would be that it would not satisfy the model that God has made, and as God has made the man and the woman for this purpose, it would mean that the model doesn't apply, and there will be no peace and harmony in the home. And so this is important for those of us who are married, and those of us who are younger, those who are planning to be married, and those who are planning to be parents-in-law or parents of kids who are going to get married. This entire verse reflects all parties. And so it is important for us then to have peace and harmony in a home that the model is adhered to. When the model is not adhered to, there will be no peace and harmony. It will be strife, right? There will be lots of problem. And so from here, I will leave these thoughts with you, that God has placed so much emphasis in chapter 2 to describe the formation of man intimately, and to show him that he is a living nephesh, and then sees that there is a need to construct, design, and build the woman from the rib of a man. Now, as a summary, the man sees the woman and calls her the beating of his heart. The woman is actually the heartbeat of the man. And hence you can see the intimate relationship between the man and the woman. And the man says, not only are you the heartbeat, you are the bone out of my bone, the flesh out of my flesh, and you have come out of me, and you should be called Isha, because it came out of Ish. And here we can see that they will both have to leave the father and mother and cling to each other and live as one body, and thereby concluding the message of the creation. And the pinnacle of the creation is the man and woman. The man and woman becomes the focal point of the rest of the story in the Bible, thereby telling us that we are special, we are made in the image and likeness of God. Both male and female are in the image and likeness of God, and nobody is short of anything, but together as a complement of each other, God sees this as a blessing, right? God sees this as a blessing. And hence, this is the end of chapter 2, and I shall thank you very much for joining me once again, and thanks for making some time. I hope that we are clear that the intent of God making man is both the masculine and the feminine. So gender is very part of the design of God. It is not by accident. Even from a science standpoint, it is impossible to explain the existence of two genders. And so by design, God has a purpose for them so that they can come together as the father and mother of a new tent. And that will be complementary. And it is in chapter 2 of Genesis that we can see how man and woman individually is so important to God, that God had specially made man in that form we saw last week in verse 7. And then we saw how God made the woman also very specially, and how the two of them come together. Now, I have not been able to overemphasize that when the man saw the woman, that should be how the man valued the woman, as the beating of his heart, as well as to understand that when you cut the bone and you cut the flesh, you cut each other, and both shall feel the same. So the whole the whole concept of bone from my bone and flesh from my flesh, we can see in later chapters in Kings, when the people of Israel came to David and says, "We are your bone, we are your flesh." And that's the whole idea. If anything happens to David and David says something, the whole of Israel will follow. And that is why we can see that bone of my bone, or bone out of my bone, flesh out of my flesh, is a Hebrew idiom for really the togetherness in mind and soul. And so with that, I thank you. That I hope all of you can have a better understanding of why did God make man and woman separately, and then make them complementary, and make them before God to live in a way that is befitting the model of the father and mother of the tent. All right, with that, thank you very much, and good night.
Good night.
Thank you.
Thank
Good
you.
night.
Thank you.